and the team. Thanks, Andrea. And this is also now on the hub, if you want to zoom in, I think, as well. Yeah. So I'll pass over to you, Trudy. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. First of all, welcome to the adoption of the annual plan. You've had a journey to get here of 2 workshops, 2 meetings, 1 consultation, 1 deliberation, and you have a star player of the day on the team, which is Councillor Pye, and her questioning has brought to light some things that I will cover off during this report. So before we began this annual plan, we actually had some financial and funding implications that were taken into account. Those included funding and financial implications. The budget was discussed throughout both the 21st of March 23 Council meeting report and the 4th of April Council meeting report. Factors influencing the strategic environment continue to have an impact on Council's financial forecasts, work programme and the ability to deliver. The draft budgets endeavour to account and adjust for some of this uncertainty. The long-term plan has also set out several significant forecasting assumptions that are used in the development of the draft annual plan. The following budget assumptions have been followed in the development of this annual plan. No changes in the levels of service as to what has been provided for in the previous LTP or long-term plan. Compliance with the debt to revenue limit of 210%. So for every $100,000 in revenue, Council can borrow up to $210,000, and that is a self-imposed limit at the current stage. Compliance with revenue and financing policy, which specifies matters such as the rating framework and funding of depreciation, and targeted rates will be maintained or increased from the current 2022-23 levels. Following the draft annual plan of 23-24 being released for consultation in this report, Council officers have continued to review the operating budget for savings and efficiencies as assumptions and forecasts have become more certain. In addition, the capital delivery timing of projects has continued to be refined as project timing and delivery becomes clearer. So in the report you will note on page, where am I? The cover report that our percentage and rates on an average decreased to 11.1% from the 13 or the 12.5 that we went out to. Councillor Pye today raised a series of questions, and I'll just share those with you. The first question was around, on page 43 of your agenda, environmental services was budgeted to have a net operating loss of $2.5 million compared to 53 budgeted in the last year. It looks like every other group is budgeted to make an operating profit. What is the difference here? Fees and charges look like they are down on the previous year, but that's based off the annual plan rather than actual. Why is that? Are we expecting less consent applications? So, really good question. So, just to give you some context, we are funding in there for the district plan review, and my colleague Mr Cooper may speak more to this if my answer is not satisfactory. We're funding that by borrowing for operating expenditure in this case, and it's a costly part of the statutory process that during the next financial year, because it's got the majority of hearings in it. When the budget was defined as part of the last long-term plan, and that's over 4 years ago, the cost estimators have moved significantly since that time. For example, consultant costs in this industry have increased by up to 20% at a minimum. Now we have more clarity on the number of hearings and the work involved, and the budget needs to move considerably, and a large component of the $2.5 million mentioned is anticipated as borrowing, and Mr Cooper is happy to talk to that further. In relation to the loss, it's always a balance for council staff in the regulatory area between fees and charges versus infringements. Infringements we can't set. They're normally set by legislation. Fees and charges, council has that option to review, and that's what you'd raised that we may look at later this year. We have a lot of compliance areas in the compliance. If you think about it, you've got parking, you've got animal control, wandering stock, noise, building and RMA or Resource Management Act compliance. So our infringements often do not cover the total cost to serve, and we cannot make targets for officers because otherwise that creates a bias and distorts the process. For example, we have a hearing planned next week for a menacing dog. That's reasonably, and that will be ratepayer funded, that's not fee funded or infringement funded. So it's reasonably common in the sector for us to operate at a loss in the regulatory space because of the challenge of the cost to serve. In the long-term plan, we can consider the cost to serve for these functions, and there is an element of community good always in the services we provide in the Environmental Services Division, because people want others to act in a certain way, and they expect council to respond to noise complaints, to respond to abandoned cars or vehicles, and to respond to dogs that might be barking a lot. On page 43, again, there was a typo noted, and I really want to thank Councillor Pye because we'd identified this error and some others, and just to give you a sense of why we have Resolution 1C. So in the cover report, it's so that the Chief Executive and I can make any final edits to the draft document before we go live. There is quite a fast turnaround, or a slow turnaround in this case, for getting the document from the graphic design to council, and we also are in a very unusual time where staff across the business are impacted by annual report from 21-22 being signed off, plus interim annual report for 22-23, both with Audit New Zealand. We are in an annual plan, and we are in a long-term plan beginning the journey of that. That is quite unusual, and that workload would normally not coincide together. And this has caused us to miss those wee typos. We're able to go back and change that, but it's through having great governance, we're able to identify that today and get it resolved. And that's why we've got a new reserve table to take you through that will align to the overall picture. So on page 86, that leads into in the dog control reserves, there was some spending that was coming out of the reserve of 657,000 that was identified in our draft annual plan. In actual fact, that's a typo, and we've resolved that. Just so you understand, dog control fees fund and maintain the dog control service and the pound or animal care facility. We have this reserve so that if we do have any increases in operational expenditure related to that activity or to capital CapEx spend, for example, say we needed some new fencing, we have that available. This year, and there is an error in the table, and I'll just let my colleague Andrea, there actually is going to be a spend of 148,000 from the reserve, not from rates and not from fees and charges, to fund provision within the service to keep it running. So that is on the bottom of your table, you'll see that movement. So I just want to highlight at this point that the table that was in the draft annual plan that you have on the hub was incorrect. And I'm going to hand over to Andrea to talk through where we are with the revised table, which is on the hub and in hard copy today.
So during the annual report process, we made the decision to reallocate our reserves from separate and special to designated and restricted. It just better reflects the actual nature of those particular reserves. So that was a late change to the annual report. So to flow that through into the model that we use for the annual report or annual plan is quite complicated. So some of these things, when the numbers were being transferred over, there was an issue with some of the balances coming forward. So this morning there was the whole reserve table was reviewed and updated to reflect those changes.
We want to acknowledge that overall everything was correct. It was just the transfers and different apportionments. Everything was right in the background. It was just the wrong table. So that will be changed, and this table will replace that. The next question was around how we make decisions on targeted reserves and what funds are added and what funds are transferred to cover our budget spend. And we have a number of targeted reserves that sit there and don't seem to have money going out in and out. And there was a question around community boards. But there are some bequests. So council does have a restricted reserve. Basically means the money can only be used for what it's been tagged to. So unless you go and get a legal or government overturning that decision, you can only use that money for what it's there for. A designated reserve, you can decide in council with a resolution to use that money for something else. So when we went through the long-term plan process in 2021-22, I need you to think back for what the environment was possibly like. And we were looking at a lot of funding options for capital expenditure, but most of it, borrowing would have been seen as being the most prudent option at that time, and that's what's been decided on at that point in time. And that does fluctuate, and the Chief Executive might want to make further commentary if I've gone off track, but essentially those decisions were made at that time. We are coming into the next long-term plan and we can decide to look at these differently. We can take a strategic lens and say, actually, there are some small reserves within our libraries, for example, that may be used for different literature. They could be applied and we could spend those funds. That is an option, and that is something that we talk about when we look at a project or we look at how we're funding a service. We look at all the different options, whether it's reserves, whether it's rates, whether it's borrowing or a target rate, etc., etc. So I hope that clarifies that. Is there anything you wanted to add, Mr. Curran?
Yeah, thank you, Trudy, and through you, Your Worship. The sort of decision was that the interest rates were very low, and so it was therefore cheaper to borrow the money than to use the reserve funding. We've managed to mitigate that to quite a reasonable extent in terms of our hedging. So what you see is that we're in the money on the hedging, and so it has generally been, and the way the funding model was set up through the long-term plan was that it would be cheaper to use funding, borrowed funds rather than reserve funds. And that we're still quite well in the money. If you look at our gross interest versus our interest expense, we still have quite a margin there as well, which means that our financing costs overall, because of the hedging, haven't changed, even though the individual interest rates have gone up. We've received more hedging income as well. So that was essentially the driver and the reasoning.
Yeah, 100% question, Michelle.
So can you use those reserves retrospectively or not?
No, they're always available. So you can make a choice when a decision comes up to actually substitute out the debt and replace it with reserve funding. But in terms of yesterday's, it's a bit like yesterday's motel room. You can't rebook it, but it is available tomorrow night. So the reserves are still there. They haven't gone away. But you could make a decision in some instances that actually we will reserve fund something rather than to borrow for it. And we do that on occasions when matters have come back from time to time that haven't been anticipated. We've gone to reserves.
Sorry, is there any other questions on that, just so we don't get right through and just conscious that we want to pick up some questions because we've got covering a bit of content. But just one really quick one. It's actually on the bequests and it's slightly off topic. But we're effectively getting out internal rate of return for bequests. And is there a smarter way that we should be dealing with those around getting a better return from some of those? Because a lot of them have just sat here getting out internal rate of return for some time. and I do wonder if we haven't got a policy, we do look at a policy whereby we can, perhaps, I don't know, just look at other options. Yeah.
I think through you, Your Worship, that's a really interesting point, and we do have to balance out using a reserve and actually getting it off the books, because it's administration, and for efficiency, potentially the best way to deal with it is to make a decision on what you're going to use it for, spend the reserve, and allow the community to get the value that's created from that.
Yeah, 100%.
I've got a few more things, or do you want me to be quiet now?
No, you keep going, Trudy. I think.
Right.
Oh, sorry, question, and then we'll. Sorry, two questions. Yeah, go.
We just go from the top, we just come in when we're on that page, so
Yep.
it just seems to me we're all over the show.
I think you're covering some of those questions that you'd had, the written ones, which is great because it's important that we get those out there, that they're answered in the chamber. Sorry, Ellen, did you have a question now? Thanks.
I just see some bequests to the art gallery, etc., and I just wonder if that money's actually, it's perhaps been sitting there for a while. So is that actually appreciating in value, or is that actually just put in the big pool? Is it,
I think at this point in time, it's essentially just sitting there. So it comes down to the whole, that we haven't got a policy around, well, okay, if we invest that money, we're getting, $10,000 a year, so it would go up. So essentially, I suspect it's been that for a while.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and we're likely to have some into the future as well. So I think we'll park that, but come back to it, and can we better use that money and invest that money? Right. Cool. So, back to you, Trudy and Andrew.
So there was also a question around the community board reserves. So community board reserves, this year the community boards have been going through a strategic plan process where they've been identifying infrastructure projects for up to 200,000. They also have some reserves that are available to them, and during this process they might identify other projects that are not infrastructure related that they may want to fund, and they can do that through their delegations as a community board. So that's just to give you some context there. In terms of, there was a question around the upgrade of the ablution block at the Winchester Domain. So that relates to the camping ground, and that's why it's being rates funded. But that is a commercial enterprise, and down the track when the lease is due for renewal, then it'll be reviewed with having a new ablution block to recover those costs. So it wasn't able to be taken from a reserve because there wasn't a reserve to fund it.
So on that point though, is that not a discussion now around improvements, because it's quite a considerable improvement to a commercial business? Sorry, thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. Yeah, in answer to that, the ablution blocks have been on the cards for quite some time, actually, and we need to do the work. We've set those funds aside, but we have an issue with the school, who actually own the sewer system and also have their own worm system for active use of waste. And we have to tap in and connect to their sewer system. So we're waiting for the Ministry of Education to say yes. We've had lots of to and froings. Philippa Steins, in her previous role here, spent most of last year with lots of meetings on site. We are trucking waste away reasonably regularly from the Winchester camp, and our lease means that we, as a landlord and an owner of the land, we have to provide those ablution blocks. So the money's there, we haven't spent it yet, but we are now very, very close to being able to provide those new blocks there because of the amount of people that I use in that campsite. Coming back to your question, that's the time to review the lease. Yes, there are improvements there, most definitely, but we'll have to review the lease, which are very, very basic in these regards for the campgrounds, they're not as commercial at a high rate as they could be. I think that's the opportunity when they do come up for renewal final to relook at them. Camping grounds have been struggling, this one in particular, and it now houses a lot of people who actually don't have anywhere else to live. There are some permanent people and permanent people that moved from the campground in Temuka when we had those changes last year and the group sold up. A lot of the permanent people from the Temuka campground moved across to the Winchester. So it needs a review on quite a few fronts because it is becoming a reasonably permanent campground situation, as well as still taking people on a nightly basis or a week. So but the numbers certainly have increased there, which is why an increase in the ablution block facilities is required.
So I just signalled that this would be part of our long-term plan and the activity management plan that Ms Timoney puts in place for camping grounds, if that makes sense. Because it's an activity that council manages and we have an activity management plan to support that.
So just for clarification, each of the camping grounds, other than Pleasant Point, is leased out to a management structure. What they then do with it within the realms of our district plan, and otherwise they have to follow all of those rules, but technically then what they do on site, we provide the base facilities as part of the lease agreement. And yeah, the exchange of the ablution block is one of those upgrades.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'm happy to park that for further discussion later on. All okay with that? Yep, cool. True.
You'll note that on page 91 or page 101 of your agenda, that the affordability measure of total rates will increase, well, total rates increase will be less than 7% plus inflation. So I just need to acknowledge to the room that we don't use the CPI. So the CPI was around 6.7 at that time, at the year-to-date end of March. We actually use the Burl figures as part of our assumptions for the planning going forward. The Burl figures were 2.5%. So if you add that brings, or 2.6, that brings us well under, so we haven't met that objective, but that's the why behind it. At the time, officers did raise this with Tai Tuara, that the Burl figures were quite light on inflation, but this was what was agreed as the industry standard going forward. Did you want to comment on that, Mr Chief Executive? Or
Question though, no, not all councils, because if you look back and we had a lower rate increase last year, which was reflective of Burl, but some councils did reference CPI versus Burl, and so not everyone's actually using Burl, are they?
Through you, Your Worship, I think when the long-term plans are set, Burl as the standard that's used in terms of the cost of increase of that we deal with in the sector. And so because we've used that and it's an assumption that is signed off by the auditor, we feel compelled really, even if we felt as we did strongly on this occasion, as a number of councils did, that actually it wasn't representative of the true costs. That was the assumption that we had built our models on, and therefore it's one of the challenges we're stuck with, those assumptions that were cast back in 2021. And while they updated the number, it was that we would use the Burl adjusters in our models. So it has created some challenge, because we think, like many others, that in actual fact it's run considerably higher than what they projected. Yeah.
so then there was also a question raised around the community works and services for stormwater costs based in each community, and a question around Temuka having a larger increase, higher than Timaru or Geraldine, but previously Timaru was a lot lower. So just to understand those drivers, when a level of service is set for what is expected in an activity, that is what staff are working towards to provide as one of those key assumptions at the start. When that activity is being reviewed, the activity or the business unit manager and the group manager of infrastructure have had to include a price increase for that activity, which is what is factored in. Then what happens is our revenue and financing policy defines how things are rated for in different boundaries, and that takes into account the rateable areas for those boundaries for those ratepayers. So basically what happens is you get the cost to serve for Temuka and you divide it by the number of rateable units, and that's how you get your rate. So Timaru has economies of scale. The more ratepayers you have, the less you pay. So that's just a little bit of understanding. That's one activity in particular, but you may see that with some activities. But remember, we were working to the assumption that we wouldn't drop the level of service to the community. In terms of, I'd also like to point out there was, and we note that there was an error in the fees and charges on under the planning area, and it was missing a line that should have said land use consent monitoring fee for a single site inspection, 2 hours of a monitoring office, and it will be a monitoring officer, and it will be paid at the time of lodgement. That will be corrected for the final version. And finally, where do we show our transfers out of reserves, and how does that all come into play? And I have to say, sometimes in local government, it does feel like you're going through the complicator. So I've tried to explain, I'll try to explain this, but Mr. Chief Executive, jump in if necessary. So we're required by statute to produce and provide a financial impact statement, or FIS for short, to explain why we plan to complete capital works plus depreciation for future renewals or asset replacement. The FIS does not easily translate exactly the source of the funding, just the why. So is it a renewal? Is it an increase in level of service? Or is it to maintain a level of service? So then in the reserve section, from pages 72 to 78, we show what's going in and going out, but we've replaced that with this table. And I think I've said enough, so I will go forth with questions.
Thanks, Trudy. Questions? And in regard to the FISs, I'm sure we'll cover that in detail with the long-term planning process as well, so there'll be ample opportunity to get yourself up to speed if you're not.
I was just going to say the FISs are set by statute, so we don't have any flex around trying to modify it to make it more readable. We have to deal with it as it's set out in the regulations and so on. But if you go through the numbers, the reserve movements, and those movements in the FISs in total do reconcile. But you've got to go through each individual one and make adjustments, but they do reconcile. And it's a problem that the FIS is not really designed to provide a reconciliation back to core documents, but rather show how funding has been applied, particularly in terms of capital spend, levels of service, meeting demand, etc.
I think my question was derived from the incorrect table, which looked like we were using 16 million of reserves, which has now been corrected and the figure's much smaller, so that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Further questions? You're right, Councillor Booth.
Just accounting policies, 92, and I'm just trying to struggle to find that, but does this report actually comply with the local government requirements around the reporting and our accounting policies that are actually laid out?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, to give a bit of comfort around that, Councillor Booth, essentially the annual plan is a 1 year snapshot of the long-term plan for that year, and in there that's audited, and that's why we have to go through any material departures. And so back to the Burl issue, that would have been a departure from one of our assumptions if we'd said, we're going to use a different inflation adjuster. So we've got to stick quite closely to what we agree here, and that does include the accounting policies and the way we present and measure items in the balance sheet and the P&L, or statement of comprehensive revenue and expenses.
Councillor Paddington.
So, just as we're talking around inflation and Burl and everything, within our capital projects, it says there's a provision for inflation on the table 24, page 24. There's all the colourful dots. I'm just wondering what rate of inflation that is, or are we changing ourselves by using a Burl prediction there as well?
Two 2.6% was used, which is the Burl rate.
Sorry, what percentage?
2.6%, which is the Burl rate.
But doesn't that put us under enormous pressure that it's going to be incorrect in the reality? Over a $81 million spend, you might be another $5 million out. And how do we cover that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it is one of the challenges that we have when we come and look at the cost of projects, but what we first seek to do is manage the project within the fiscal envelope. And in some instances, and Mr Dixon, I think, could come forward, there are projects and there are contracts where in actual fact our estimate of the cost of the project doesn't actually, we do get it for less. So while there's a swings and there's a roundabouts, we have to put in a number, and we have to put in a number that has been audited, is verifiable, and to your point, we do go through these projects, we do look to cost them, but on some projects we have actually come in, and I think you could list somewhere that savings have been not insignificant, Mr Dixon.
Thank you. Yeah, there are projects who actually have come in under budget. We just actually signed one off today, which is the South Street Bridge renewal, which was under by about quite a few $100,000. So landfill project also was well under. So the projects are costed based on the rates of today, effectively. So it's not just a blanket inflation adjustment made from previous. We actually do recost them and say, right, this is what our best estimate is, and we put it into the annual plan.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks.
Just while you're there, Andrew, to stop having to down. The capital project's at 90 million for the year, 81.7. Does that include the carryover of projects we haven't completed this year? Or does that go on top of that number?
No, the 91 million includes carry forward. So we sort of looked at our program in advance and said, right, what projects are not going to be completed, and we've added them into the annual plan. So they are there, yeah.
On that, what was sort of the value of the carryover? Because I guess I'm concerned that it's great to have that number, but are we going to deliver it? So how many million in project did we carry over this year? Ballpark.
Through you, Your Worship, it says on that page 16 of the, but it's page 24 of the agenda. 26, my apologies. Approximately 15.3 million is for project work that was initially planned to be completed in 22-23, and that will now be planned to be delivered in 23-24. So 15.3 million.
Yeah, look, and I think we'll acknowledge that we're ahead of a bit of a bump in the road, very much so in regard to that vertical build, because we were doing really well for a couple of years, and then the last year has been a challenge. So the challenge for the team will be to get that the wider team, governance and officers, to get that back on track. Also, I just wanted to talk briefly to that. It's interesting if I look to the last sort of 3 odd years with the tenders that we've signed off for some time, they were under, and then we've had a period of, sort of over budget, but the last few have been under again. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues to trend under, or it rights itself. Who knows? But yeah, that's quite positive. But I'd certainly take your concern around that point around inflation, and I think that's going to be a key one as far as that discussion for LTP again and financial strategy.
Sorry, just my last question on projects, because I've been caught and agreed in the long-term plan or annual plan, putting money in when I thought it was just discussions. I've got concerns still around that 5 million for the farmers' car park, why we would even have it in the budget if it's safe, and there's other things to do, because I went there at 2 o'clock today, and I think there were 9 cars on the level 3 of 42 parks. So there's no demand to do that. And I thought we we're also going to look at other options before we repaired it. So by putting it in the budget, do we still get that option as councillors of deciding to do something else or do nothing? Or are you going to come back to me 6 months down the track and say, you agreed to it in the annual plan? Because I don't agree to it.
Yeah, look, my expectation on that one is it's provision only, and that although it isn't in the budget, it needs to be there. It would have to come back to council for any decisions, and I assume there's still some water to go under the bridge as far as what those decisions are likely to be, but happy to take some commentary from the officers.
Yeah, and thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and then the reason we do make provision and put it in because we'll have to come back. But if we then haven't put it in, then you have a discussion as to why was it, if you had knowledge of it, why was it unfunded, and did you not have into the budget an appropriation to manage that issue if you had a reasonable expectation. Now, the auditors, I think, are going to require that there is some sort of provision made as well, and that therefore has to be put in. So there's a range of reasons why it goes in, but it doesn't mean that the decisions have been made. What it means is that there is funding available should a decision be made to progress that matter. And that is borrowed money, and I think I'm correct in that regard, it is to be borrowed. And so the borrowings are not drawn down unless the work is undertaken. But it is important in terms of managing a whole range of issues in terms of your borrowing capacity for other projects, that you are aware of what provisions you may have to make or consider, so that if you make other decisions, you're making them with the most informed information available.
On that theory though, and the carryover, we've rated people in the previous year for projects we said were going to go ahead, but not. That was included in our interest payments. So where does that credit go? Because we haven't done the work. And I know you're going to say we didn't draw down, so we haven't spent the money, but we did put it in the estimated rates for last year. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. So essentially the interest portion of the rates is based at the value of what we've actually drawn down. So it's not what we anticipate to draw down that's factored into the rate increase. It's essentially what we have already drawn down that gets factored into the rate increase. So essentially it's a year behind.
Yeah, you've got that year lag, haven't you, as far as recouping the cost. But it's an interesting point because it's something that we get questioned on fairly regularly. Cool, sorry, further? Keep going.
My last one around capital spend. Sorry, but it is important. We've had 2.5 in the budget for quite a long time for the airport. We've still got 2.5. I don't think that's a reasonable number anymore, because every time we hear someone come, there's been increases of 20, 30%. How can the number still be what it was a couple of years ago going forward? Or have we taken the top story off that design?
The airport was originally 1.7 and we have increased that to 2.5. So there has been an increase allowed for some cost escalations there. And the plan is we'll be going out for procurement very shortly for design services, but we will basically stage that development to fit the budget. That is the plan. So the initial 2.5 million may not be the full scheme, and it will include an upstairs, but that upstairs may not, most unlikely be fitted out. So we are planning for the future. It's likewise with we're providing provision for aviation security, AVSEC, to be present, but that won't be fitted out yet because we're not doing that at this point. So we're effectively creating a box to allow for the future, but not all of that fit out's going to be done.
I think on that one, I think actually we probably need we could get some value out of a public workshop just to get everyone up to date again around what, if decisions have been made and where everything's at with it, because I think it's just been parked for some time. It's been some time since we've talked about it, and there's probably some value in us having a good conversation on that one again. Sorry, I'll go back to you, Councillor Piddington.
Last one, I'm uncomfortable with that theory where we don't actually tell the councillors what it's going to cost. We'll have a surprise for you later on when we finish it off. I'd like to know, when we do these things, what it's going to cost, including all the fit out, everything in it. Because we go up and then say we need another 2 million the following year. Well, it should be included in the cost, surely.
Well, we are embarking on the design, and then part of that design we will get some accurate costings, and that will definitely come back to council at that point. But it has been signalled in the long-term plan a staged approach, so there is further funding in the long-term plan for these additional things. So we have sort of tried to give a costing for the entire project.
I think, just if I think back to the airport some years ago, and when we were looking at it, and I suspect part of the reason we're coming back now is because we fitted it within a fiscal envelope, and we didn't have all of the, we didn't expand it further than what our funding envelope really allowed, or only a modest increase about from what had been provided. But it had gone, there was some increase permitted, but then there was a cap put, and when the costings came in, we then adjusted what we did. But it goes back to 2018, was it, Councillor, Mr Dixon, I think, 2018 we did that project last.
Yes, we had a sort of a bit of a master plan that included, you know, the resurfacing of the runway, the extension of the apron, and this is just we've got a plan there to move on to the terminal. The terminal is currently at its capacity. We gave council an overview of that. You know, it is basically not meeting the fire regulations at times if you get 2 full flights coming in on the midday. But the other thing I'll point out is that we're expecting additional revenue to come in from Air New Zealand and from New Zealand Government regarding the security side of things, and we don't know how much that is at the moment. We'll be negotiating that, but if Air New Zealand move basically the check-in counter to the other end of the terminal, which they would like to do, that'll be at their cost, not necessarily ours. So it's all tied up in our lease agreements that we have. So there will be additional revenue coming in.
That's cool. So look, I think we do need to just get everyone back up to speed on that project, and even just a walkthrough maybe on site, because I think that would benefit. And also the last time we did talked about, even it looks like there's some holes as far as what a business case would look like, but we did talk about that. So even to talk through some of that at a workshop as well. So let's look to schedule that if we can. To the point that you saying we're engaging on design, when and what does that process look like? Obviously we want to have that conversation before we do that. So would that go to market on Gets, etc., effectively?
That's correct, yes. It will be open market.
How can we do that without a business case beforehand? Go out for design when we don't know what we're designing without the business case?
Yeah, hence a workshop beforehand, I would think. Yeah. I think there's timing-wise, and this is one that I look at, and it's I'm okay with it sort of being deferred. Most projects I'm not, but this one is not, time-bound as such, is it?
Yeah, we have presented to council on this project in the past and run through what we're proposing, and we also, of course, included it on the council tour as well. We stopped at the airport and explained what was going on there. So there has been some information that's been provided, and I'm happy to provide more.
Yeah, we've done that, but we haven't had a business case where we've seen the figures, how much more Air New Zealand are going to pay, how this is going to be funded. Because I thought a business case would have figures around it.
Yeah, that's right. I think we can. Yeah, we'll take that offline and we'll do that point. Yeah. Any other questions on that one? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Oh, not on that one. Yeah. Yeah, 100%, Councillor Oliver.
Just got a quick question for Andrew first. It looks like the Beautiful Valley water rates are increasing from $16.70 to $22.40 per hectare. Is that for the upgrade of that water scheme? Is it to bring it up to the standard?
Yes, it is at the upgrade and also the increase in basically maintenance costs as well.
Okay, that's cool. And a quick question for you. I see on the community board rates on this bit of paper, it says transfer out of the fund of $8,000 out of that community board fund in year 2024. Is that for just things that community board have appropriated funds to that aren't drawn down at the moment? That's all it is?
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Oliver. Councillor Pye.
I just had a question for Mr Dixon around the rural water schemes. How often do you review their effectiveness and the demand for them? Because my understanding is the Rangitata area is not used by all ratepayers and potentially some would like to see it closed down.
We constantly monitor demand, and as far as I'm aware, of our scheme, Sea-Down is the only scheme that is struggling with demand. We have recently done significant upgrades to both Downlands, Te Anawai and Te Moana plants, which has increased their capacities, and both of those schemes are now open for additional water should the residents, the users wish it. They have to apply for it, and it does depend on some of the feeder mains and the capacity of those, but generally there is additional water available. So the Orari scheme is part of the Temuka scheme, and I'm not aware of any demand issues that are there. Our focus has been on water quality.
So I probably didn't explain that well. I probably meant lack of demand as in more demand. And a number of on the Rangitata scheme that pay rates for it but don't use it, don't require it and probably don't want it.
I think you're talking about the stock water races. Yeah. I'm not sure how that works, to be honest. Do we have an agreement with part of the Rangitata South Irrigation Scheme? Yeah, I would have to find out more information on how that's charged.
Yeah, no, 100%. Councillor Pye.
So I just have a number of questions around the debt cap and the debt, but I'll just maybe go one at a time. So with the debt cap, is it the total debt or the net debt that the cap relates to?
Net debt.
So then when we use, the policy refers to operating revenue, so do we take out one-off grants? So if you look at this year's operating revenue compared to last year, there's about a $15 million, from memory, difference in grant and subsidy money received. So if you assumed that was one-off, that seriously changes the 2.1 debt cap. And sorry, I said I'll go one at a time, but the reason why I ask it is could we get ourselves into a position where we go really close to that debt cap and then the following year our revenue drops substantially because we don't receive a grant and all of a sudden we're outside of our debt cap?
Chief Executive, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pye. These are really questions I think need to be really well drilled and understood by everybody because they're critical, and it might also benefit from a workshop. Look, in essence, you're quite right. So when we did some of the reports, we noted that in actual fact the debt to revenue, because what happens is we use a revenue to net debt ratio of 2.1, as you've identified. So with that 128 odd million, we actually did eliminate 15 or 16 million by way of report, and said that actually the ratio was closer to 1.95 than it was just on this raw number. So we did adjust that out. and make people aware. At the moment, I think the net debt ends up at about 205 million against a cap of an adjusted cap of about 245 to 250 million at the end of 2024 is roughly the number. Then the other calibration I think that's really important, and this is where I think is the Fitch rating one and how it impacts our rating with Fitch. And they have a payback ratio, and I think I'm looking for a nod or a shake from Mr. Rivet here, but I think the ratio at about payback ratio of 9, then we run a risk of losing our current AA minus credit rating, which is worth something because of course it lowers our interest rate. So I don't think there's a problem in this year, and you've still got some headroom. But I do think it's really important that there is a clear understanding about the importance of revenue and maintaining that revenue, the effect on the debt cap, and then also calibrating that against the Fitch rating metrics, which influence and ensure we keep a pretty good investment grade rating for a council of our size. So I don't know if that helps to answer, but we're not in danger of it this year. But you're quite right. If you eliminate some of that funding, and it is about 15 million, it does bring the ratio closer to the ceiling of the self-imposed ceiling of 2.1, because you can actually go to 2.8, but at 2.8 you would then be running into challenges with your Fitch payback ratio. So there's it takes a few moving parts to sort of be managed.
So I just wonder about how you come up with the net debt, because when I looked at the forecast, there's the total debt of 264 million, and then I took off the other current assets, I can't remember what they're called now, but which was about 38 million, which comes back to a net debt of 226.
Sorry, yes, so beg your pardon, it's 264, sorry, I was referencing a prior year. Yes, 264 minus about 38 plus 5.5, so say 43.5. So you're about 220, and on so around about 220. Now that does lower the ratio, and that was why in our report we said it was 1.95 was a closer ratio, because we adjusted out around about 15 million from the operating revenue because it wasn't guaranteed as recurring. So quite correct, yes.
So when I did the calculations, if you use the income as reported, 2.1 is 270 million, so there's a bit of a gap between the net debt and that. But if you took out, say, 15 million, you come back to 238 million, which is quite close to a net debt of 226.
Through you wish. I actually have to go through all of the numbers to come to that, because when I look at those adjustments, I'd have to work out and work my way through them all, and then against the net debt to come to it. But I do know, what I can say is that the ratio is considerably higher when you make the adjustments than if you calculate it just off the raw numbers in the financial statements. So the financial statements give a slightly glossier picture than I think is the reality because of that non-recurring debt adjustment. That non-recurring revenue adjustment.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's my point is, in my view, we're sailing a bit close to the wind if we have that non-recurring income in future. Yeah.
To the self-imposed limit, yeah, yes.
In that ward, that's not normal though, is that extra revenue effectively via, what have we got at the moment? We've got the landfill and some others, but I can't recall seeing that in the past in my time. The extra revenue effectively of the likes of the landfill, etc. That's uncommon, isn't it? It's normally more balanced.
Yeah, what through to you, Your Worship, what we adjusted out in terms of the additional revenue was, I think, was it some of that Waka Kotahi funding, ministry, the Theatre Royal extra funding, the balance, it was that sort of funding that we took out as a non-recurring revenue. That was the sort of funding, and I think when we added it up, we came to about $15 million was the number.
So I still come back to, if you take that out, the revenue times 2.1 would only be 238 million, and our net debt is 226, which is not a lot of gap.
Yeah, that's approximately correct. So you are quite close. Yes, and yes, that you are getting quite close to your 2.1 in that year. Yeah.
I know your annual plan's quite regulated on how you present it, but in future, do you think it's good to present those figures quite clearly and how we meet, or have we got that in there? Because maybe I didn't read it closely enough to see that quite clearly presented how we are against our financial strategy.
Yes, we could. No, and so we were working out. Well, we can't adjust the financial statements. Trudy one.
Through you, Your Worship, we could actually have something like that in the cover report, so it gives you a breakdown on top of the annual plan.
Because in one of the cover reports we noted we'd gone up to about 1.95, whereas when you went back, if you used the numbers in the financial statement, it was about 1.73. It was quite a lot lower, and so we could do that in the cover report.
Sorry, I'll go to Councillor Booth and then back to Councillor Oliver. And sorry, everyone else is okay over this side? I missed anyone? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Booth.
Yeah, look, I just reading the 2017 financial strategy, which perhaps we need to go back and have a look at and review. But really, and at that time we were 1.5 times.
Sorry, what year?
2017. I'm not going to quote anything out of it. But
No. Question that one's quite out of date in regard to our current.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think
one that we're currently operating under is my point.
Yeah, sure.
But you go for it. Yep.
So what I'm getting at is perhaps we should base our debt on actually what our rates are, what we're rating our ratepayer, and therefore if you're doing a project, you will do a targeted rate to increase that rate, and then therefore charge for that capital project. It makes it quite clear, and we shouldn't be relying on subsidies and grants, including those in our budgets. So whatever that number may come out as, but that's what you've got control of, and it's very clear what your debt level is. I look back, and at one point we were like 1.1, and then we went to 1.4, 1.5. Here we are now 2.1, and now we're including the numbers are getting bigger, and the subsidies perhaps are getting bigger, and we're utilising them to actually enable more debt. But in actual fact, we've gone from about 30 million debt to around $200 million debt within almost probably 6 years. So we can't probably continue like that, and so therefore I think we need to be careful what we're actually, the capital project, as Councillor Punnington mentioned, made it very clear.
Yeah, and so in the last financial strategy, we discussed that, and the plan was around the projects in front of us was to do just that. We needed to borrow that money to do the projects in front of us, and there's a bit of a catch up on some of that vertical infrastructure, which I'm not putting blame anywhere, but I would say that we're in a period where R&M wasn't spent, and now you're at a point where these, you know, projects need a full redo rather than, you know, just a bit of a spruce up. So I think that was, you know, fully discussed in the, you know, financial strategy on our trajectory. So we're exactly where we thought would be outside of some cost escalations, and you know that's part of the review in the next financial strategy in the LTP process around doing that again. But take your point. I mean, you know, it stems back to actually how far can we go with the current funding model. You know, there's some good stuff in the likes of the Future of Local Government report around the funding model isn't sustainable. So moving forward with the next financial strategy, you know, we talked today around, you know, bridge renewals that are needing to happen, but we are going to have to make some hard choices and prioritisation around what we can and can't do in that capital program, probably for the next term. So I'll go now to Councillor Oliver.
Well, just a quick question to you, Trudy. Just under the Jordan Endowment Fund, that's not showing that grant that was to go to Peel Forest Outdoor Pursuit Centre on that bit of paper there. Is that a reason for that, or has that just been missed?
Through your worship, I'll have to check that and take that offline. So I don't have that information right here.
Thanks.
But I'll come back to you.
Go to Councillor Burton and back out.
So I was just seeking some clarity around the fact that the reality is that subsidies and grants are something we do have to factor in there. You can't take them and put them to one side because we don't know the reality of them. If we look at it in the context, and the question you, Andrew, around, you know, roading, I mean, the FAR contracts or amounts that we get and the subsidies that we get on a significant amount of money spent every year at 51% or something, that's a massive reality and a big chunk of money. So it's something that we do know that's there, and we have to take that into account. So we couldn't effectively say, no, we're not going to look at that.
I think Councillor Pye and then Councillor Biddington, thanks.
Sorry, just a couple of comments on page 7 at point 12. Without
Page 7.
Yeah, page 7, point
Thank you.
12. Without knowing the ETS scheme intimately, I think it looks like good work on the officers in purchasing those ETS credits at a much lower price than what was budgeted. So well done. And then I just kind of had more of a general comment that probably relates to the LTP. But when you look at page 25, and we're spending 800,000 on a playground and 410,000 on libraries and only 300,000 on social housing, that seems to be quite an issue for the region. Perhaps we need to think about our priorities when we're talking about the long-term plan next.
Yeah, and the social housing will be a conversation that we'll have within the long-term plan. So, yeah, it's been highlighted, so we will do that. Sorry, who was it? Oh, Councillor Biddington, thanks.
I guess I'd just like to support Councillor Pye and Booth, and I take Councillor Burt's comments on, but some of those grants are one-off, like a theatre, we're not going to get those again. So it would be good to have those at the forefront when we make our decision to spend 2 million here, 5 million there, because if you took this year, we're 5 million over in spending, that gets us down to within about $6 million of our debt cap. So we just need to treat things a wee bit carefully. Just two other questions.
Yeah, no, go for it. Well, and 100% agree, because it's the one-off versus the ones that, you know, the far rate that we're getting every year.
And occasionally it doesn't, not front of mind. Just on page 47, I just had, I think it's page 47, hang on. Oh, yeah, page 47, South Canterbury Museum, the Heritage Hub fit out spending $790,000 this year. I just hope we're not going to spend any of that till we make the final decision on what it looks like and where we're going with that. And why does that sit outside the project? If you've got a fit out cost of a building, normally that would be part of a project cost. It's kind of a sly way of slipping another mill in.
Yeah, the fit out always did sit outside of. So going back, I think even to when the decision was made back in, but 4 years ago or what have you, I'm pretty positive. But you're right. Someone could look at that and think, oh, it's creative accounting. We'll just put another line somewhere else. But it was always outside of. So yeah. Nicole, happy to take comment, but you'll have to jump up to a microphone. Thanks. Yeah, please. Thank you.
To your point, Councillor Piddington, there's three aspects to the fit-out involved with the Theatre Royal Museum. So we actually have the construction, the hard element of the build itself. We have what we call a landlord fit-out component to the theatre, the museum, and then all of the other areas. And then you've got what you could class as a tenant fit-out. So the 700 odd that's put aside, Philip put that as a tenant fit-out, and then did some design work to find that the design is going to cost an awful lot more than what he first thought he might like to do for a fit out, and has taken it a few levels up, and that is the fundraising exercise he's going to do in the public arena to offset the 700 to bring it to the 3.5 that they're looking at for their fit out. But it's a tenant fit out, not the landlord component. 3.5 is an estimate of the cost, and most of it is coming from, they've actually already fundraised quite an amount of money, and the 700 is the contribution from the tenant to that. Yep. That helps.
Brilliant, thank you. I think I'd covered this side, hadn't I? Back to Councillor Booth.
Is there anything else that sits outside the 57.1 current budget that's would be attributed to the heritage theatre work?
No.
Thank you.
So car parking, everything's included in that regard, isn't it? Ceiling,
Yes.
etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's the total package. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Piddington.
Probably the easiest question of the day on this wonderful long sheet we've got. The Fairview Halls, I take it, minus $8,000. How can they be negative, and how do they get back to the positive?
So they can be at a negative, and then it's recouped through rates at a time, because it depends on some works that may be urgent or anything like that, and then they can come back into line slowly over time rather than a massive hit.
Is that a targeted rate on those halls, or is that from general rates?
It's a targeted rate depending on where you live.
So how many years will it take them to pay that back?
That's a very good question that we will have to research.
Councillor Booth.
Are we having a general discussion about if any of the charges? Can I bring some of those up now, or we
can work through them if you like, because a lot of those I had sort of taken as we'd added the 5% on some of those outside of those exceptions that we talked about last time, but happy to dive into any specifics if you have. We can do that now.
Yep, sure. Perhaps page 161, water. I just see that our commercial water charge is set at 83 cents per 1,000 litres. I've just done a little bit of background on regards to, say, Water Care in Auckland and Palmerston North, Nelson. Most of them are around about $1.50 to $1.70 for the same sort of thing. And we're 83 cents. We're like half the price. And considering the cost of our water, our commercial, or the quantity of our commercial water is probably half or even greater of our water usage. Is that not something that we should be actually adjusting?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Basically, the way we set the water charge is the same way as we set the rates. So we look at what our costs are and then seek to recover those costs. So we look at, well, the estimated consumption, which is reasonably consistent every year, some ups and downs, but we look at what is the forecast consumption, divide that by the costs effectively, and that's how we come to it. I fully acknowledge the water price is very cheap. Part of that is because a lot of our water is basically from source to plant by gravity. So we don't have the large pumping costs that other councils or cities have. Yeah, so we're very lucky in that respect.
Just, I mean, if Three Waters evolves, you can be sure that the new entity will be charging a commercial rate because they're going to have to. So I just wonder whether we should be charging a management fee or some sort of fee that we could get a little bit more money. That was probably where I'm getting at.
I think where the conversation could be quite real is around who benefits from microfiltration and the investment in that, and so that'll basically be post LTP, so it's a conversation we could probably have around that specific rate in the long-term plan. So I think that's, sorry, not wanting to part all the conversations, but I think that's probably where it fits and would be a good place to have it.
Up to your question on Fairview, we collect $6,000, Councillor Piddington, across about 200 rating units. It must be slightly more because it's $29, so it's 205, 206 rating units was what they will collect. Those sort of rates are all in our funding impact statements, but it probably takes a bit of orientation to understand where they are and how to find them in the totals and so on, but yeah.
Councillor Pye.
Is the fluoridation of the water the same as the car park and everything else in that it's in the budget, but we can make a decision later whether we do it or not, just given our presentation before?
It's planned. Yeah, I'm probably Mr. Dixon speak to that, but no, it's in and happening, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah, basically we have received a letter from the Director General of Health saying that we should be installing fluoridation to start off in 2024, and from 2024, sorry. We don't know the precise date that they would enforce it. It does say from 2024. So we have provided provision in the budget to install the equipment in preparation for that date, and we can choose to turn it on or not. Or if there is a risk in not doing it all because it is a directive.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it'll be interesting if any councils choose to push back on this. If you look to the example of Christchurch when they weren't happy around the rules around the city, the changes to the built-up environment. I forget what year. And they decided no, we wouldn't abide by the new legislation, and actually there was some talk of commissioner with them. So it'll be interesting. You probably don't want to be the test case for saying no in that regard, because hey,
You were with Three Waters.
I know the difference. The difference is between what's in law and what's out of law. A little buffer of safety.
So it's likewise with chlorination. Some of the councils have pushed back on that and sought an exemption. There has been no success in that area at all. Everybody has to do it. So fluoridation, I imagine, is going to be very similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting debate though, and it'll be interesting the debate tonight, because it's just interesting around how you're going to achieve. So with, I guess my question is around fluoridation, and we can't answer that today, but are we, for those kids that have been brought up on Coca-Cola, is fluoride water going to help them, or would a Child Smile program, help them more? I don't know the answer, I'm not the expert. And that's why it sits with the Ministry of Health and not local councils to make those decisions.
Put fluoride in Coke and we wouldn't have a problem.
Put fluoride in Coke. It might be the idea of the day. Councillor Piddington, I'm sure you've got something else to say.
Couldn't resist it so much. Just in terms of fees, I've been approached in the waste management fee going up. The timing of this, we make a decision, goes up 1st of July. If you're in business, you don't actually have a chance to advise your clients and move forward. So I just wondered whether we should, at times, to be fair to everyone, have some sort of stepped approach, because we'll put their costs up, they can't probably transfer them on for a period, especially if it's above what they expected. So I'm just interested in people's thoughts around that.
Okay, so I can speak as far as the waste, because that's probably one of the ones that has come to our attention, but basically, you know, the draft fees and charges have been out in the public. They were advertised, so that were aware that cost increases were coming.
Sorry, Mr. Dixon, were they up, the question though was, that was put to us, were they updated? As far as once we'd had that initial meeting in April, were they updated from the draft? So I think they were 226, and they went to 256, or was it? Yeah, they ended up going to 290, I think, is that what it, yeah. So did that get updated with what was online?
Yes, it did get updated, and we wrote to each of the users of the landfill and informing them of this is the draft increase. So there's about was a month ago. So they have had some prior warning.
So was that a month ago it changed? Still not a lot of time.
That's all the time that they indicated that was necessary for their commercial clients. So we did consult with the industry.
Councillor Booth.
Looked on page 29, just examples of the rates increase. I note that rural is only getting a 2% increase, and townies are getting 14 and 12. So, considering the costs and the fact that the rural roads are actually a considerable part of your budget, and obviously, should we not actually that not be a little bit higher? We need to change the multiplier a wee bit.
Councillor Pye, have you got any response? No. No, it is. And these are just examples as well, aren't they? Is probably a key point.
I will just say that they don't include all the water charges that you have on some rural properties. That makes quite a difference.
Yeah, the difference is the targeted rates, and there has been an increase in targeted rates. Like the waste charges is going up, the water sewage, and these rural properties don't have those charges.
Yeah, look, and some of these things I believe sit there again within the rating review, which we did anticipate to be done for the next LTP. I know we've got some challenges, and we probably won't know some direction. It'll be easy to have direction after the election on where we're heading on a couple of things, but I think it's still an important piece of work that we did promise and that we need to deliver for the LTP. Right, who else has got a long list of questions? We'll try and get through these. Anyone else? No? We'll go back to Councillor Booth. Did you have another one?
Just about the commercial rate for the shopkeepers up the main street. They seem to pay around 4 times the amount, which is quite a lot for, a small shop. Are there any differentiations in the size taken into account, or is it just every single shop's whacked about $7,000?
No, so it's a commercial rate, no different than you'd be paying at Washdock as far as the differential. And so I think the key one is that, and that was one of the conversations from the last LTP, was from a retailer down the main street, and that was partly to drive that rating review. So I think there again it will be picked up in that space, unless you guys have anything to add, but otherwise I think that's part of that. Yeah, thank you. Alrighty, so we do need to sort of bring this together. Is there any questions that are outstanding at this stage? Otherwise we can, or any further commentary from the team, otherwise we can move towards the recommendations. Sorry, thanks, Mr. Dixon.
Research that airport one, by the way. A business case was presented to Infrastructure Committee on the 6th of September 2022, and it was basically, the support was going there for the project.
Did it have a full breakdown of costs, like what Air New Zealand will pay for the extra room? Because my understanding was we were giving that away.
talks about 4 stages to the project, and with the AVSEC and the New Zealand side of things, it doesn't give the costs that they like to pay. That was to be worked out, but it is a staged project.
I guess that's my point, Andrew, without the costs.
No, look, and I think the key one was that was prior to this council as well.
Yeah.
So we'll pick that up as an action point as far as maybe collating that information, just for all elected members. We might try and get that on the hub, and also package that up so people can get upskilled, and then we'll look to have a workshop, to cover that. So, you're happy to move just like that? Okay. Well, we'll go back to the recommendations. Councillor Booth has moved them. We'll just make sure that we've got them. For those online, just conscious moving forward as far as an improvement for those that would be online or watching this after the fact, as far as being able to show them what the resolutions are, might be something we could work towards. Just another challenge for the staff, but that's right. So recommendation A is adopts the Timaru District Council Annual Plan to 2023-24 in accordance with Section 95 of the Local Government Act. B is sets the Timaru District Council fees and charges 23-24, and C is authorises the Chief Executive and Group Manager of Commercial and Strategy to make any non-material changes. Don't make that slip, do I? To the annual plan prior to publication, for example, to improve readability. So you comfortable with that? So I've got a mover, Councillor Booth. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pye. Look for any further discussion. No. We'll put the motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Cool. Now we'll go back to 7.2, which is on 167. Yeah, some good reading in that. So there again, we've had the substantial discussion, but is there any further questions for the team before we recommend the resolution of rates, setting of rates?
Just note, Your Worship, obviously a really important resolution, given that it collects our rates, and just a matter of process. It must always come after the annual plan, because you adopt the annual plan, and then this is how the rates will fund it. So that's why it follows afterwards. And the resolution includes all of the rates in there, and really duplicates much of the report. But in a belts and braces approach, we believe that the resolution should actually set each rate. So that is why you'll note that what in effect looks like a duplication. But it is because it's in the resolution and then in the report.
Thank you. So any further questions? Otherwise, someone happy to move? Councillor Booth. Yeah, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Burt. Any further discussion? Sorry, Zero. I'll make sure everyone's up to date. Just, look up and give me a nod. Yeah, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. 7.2. Thanks for all the work, team. Really appreciate that. So we now go to consideration of urgent business items. There was none. Minor nature, there was one. We have public forum items requiring consideration. We just had a brief discussion before. I think I'll just move to receive the Child Smile report, and we'll add that, or it's not a report, sorry, information, and we'll add that to the minutes. Can I have a seconder to receive and note that? Councillor Burt. Any further discussion? Anyone like to further discuss fluoride conversation? I think we touched on it before. No. Councillor Pye?
I'm keen to get a little bit more information and understanding, especially after you go to that debate tonight, which I would have liked to have gone to but can't. Because it does worry me, there's obviously two very strong sides to the story, and that I know we're mandated to do this, but if we don't think it's the right thing for our community, perhaps we should be pushing back. And I'm not saying that I don't have an opinion at this point, I'd like to be more informed.
Yeah, some more information. I will take my notebook and I will report back. Councillor Booth.
I just wonder, it'd be quite interesting to get the other side, which would be a professional practitioner's view, such as Mark Goodhue or someone like that, because I know that they've got completely different views to what I just heard.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think Mark and Fraser, are there tonight. So we had a mover and a second to receive a note. We already had them. We're good. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Move now to exclusion of the public for the insurance renewal program. I'm happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Jackson, thank you. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. We'll just wait a few minutes to get the live stream sorted out. And thank you to Ms Dixon and the finance team, Water Finance team. Really appreciate all the work there.